Good morning, everybody in Hawaii. Aloha, as you like to say. My name is Christopher Nesbitt. I'm a farmer. I live in San Pedro, Colombia, Belize. My wife, Selene, and I run a non-governmental organization called Maya Mountain Research Farm, and we are a 30-something year experiment in sort of land restoration. I just on the announcement about this presentation said that Belize, Colombia. I am in San Pedro, Colombia in Belize, which is with the green star, and Colombia, the country, is with the red star. Just want to clarify that. In the picture on the left, marked 1980, the red star down at the bottom is where we are located. We're about 2 miles upriver from the Quechua Maya community of San Pedro, Colombia. And we're in the foothills of the Maya Mountains, hence the name Maya Mountain Research Farm. Part of our focus has been on degraded land repair because, as Vincent mentioned, I bought a very degraded citrus and cattle farm. As you also mentioned, I'm from New York City, so even though I lived in the country for a few years before I did that, I didn't have the visual literacy to understand what I was looking at. And the owner sold it pretty cheap because he was old and wanted to go to town, and I bought it because I wanted to go and live upriver. In 1980, so we're about 30 years into the work now, 33 years, and this mimics that, but of course different years. In 1980, Belize had 74.4% forest cover. In 30 years later, we had lost some and went down to 62.8% forest cover. And then a mere 4 years later, we had lost 2.5% of our forest cover. And this is a trend that is being accelerated around Central America right now. We're beginning to see the effects of climate change. Climate is changing everywhere, and we're seeing it in unexpected weather events. This is a flood that happened in February, which is supposed to be in our dry season, and it wiped out all the corn in the what we call a bega, which is seasonally inundated floodplain that's important for cultivating annuals in what they call bega, and it set farmers back a lot because that's a major part of their food cycle, and that was wiped out. In 2019, we had a drought, and for most of the country, the corn crop failed, and of course, corn is a major staple food for people here. In the center of Belize, this was actually in the month of August, which is in the middle of our rainy season. We had a pretty severe drought, and this is what that looked like. Basically looked like somebody dropped a gigantic container of herbicide on the whole planet. So we're seeing the effects of climate change right now. This is exacerbated by deforestation. When you deforest an area, less rain falls, and what rain falls is not intercepted, is not kept and not retained or stored in the landscape. Some of the enemies of deforestation are actually shifting cultivation, which I'm not demonizing entirely because there's value to it if it's done really well. The problem is that many farmers have lost the ability to properly maintain their burning, and as a result, we see lots of escaped fires. This was some farmers I worked with. I managed a cooperative of cacao farmers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. For 7 years, and these were some farmers that we were working with. The guy holding the clipboard is Ignacio Ash, my neighbor across the river, and he was my head extension officer. And the other farmers are 2 farmers from El Salvador, 1 from Honduras, who are refugees that settled in a place called Bella Vista area in Trio Junction. So we were working with a group of farmers there, and these farmers, as refugees tend to do, they hit the ground running. They really wanted to establish a toehold in the country and generate some income. So they planted cacao in a very large way. Each of them had 4 to 5 acres of cacao, and the average cacao farm in the south of Belize in Toledo district is roughly 1 acre in size. So this was a very significant loss to the farmers. Which brings us to where we are now. We'll get back to cacao in a minute. This is Maya Mountain Research Farm. I'm sitting in that building there right now, talking to you in Hawaii, so far away. And what you're looking at was, at one point in 1988, when I moved here, was degraded citrus and cattle farm. The land was very tired. The previous owner, the late Henry Genus, didn't believe that trees and progress were on the same page. So he cut down pretty much all the trees. He planted citrus, and then he ran cattle. And basically citrus, like most monocultures, has a limited lifespan before productivity starts to drop off. And for citrus, it's been grafted from sour oranges. That's about 25, 26 years. And I bought the farm, and citrus was about at year 27. So not knowing any better, I bought it and anticipated that eventually I would get old and wander around with a machete and a bucket picking up oranges, and that's happened. But I don't have the oranges, and the oranges went bad, and about a year later, the price of oranges dropped. Most Belizean farmers would go to sleep in the 1980s praying that Florida gets a hard freeze and mess up their orange crop. And so there was a glut on the market, and the citrus went bad. I got rid of the cattle very quickly because I could see that cattle were damaging to the land. In line of sight, we have a mixture of different tree species. There's a bunch of different food like mango and bread nut and coconut and mame and avocado, and there's timber species in there. There's samwood, and there's some mayflower, and underneath that there's cacao, and there's coffee, and there's cardamom, and there's turmeric, and there's yellow ginger, and there's vanilla, and there's tree legumes like the Erythrina pepigiana, which is in the left side corner in orange, and some lucena, and some I can't remember the name of the species, bastard mahogany, Pithoslobium arboreum. And what we've done here is repair the land using mimicking the process of succession that we see in forests that have been degraded. And with the exception now, large parts of the farm have the arboreal architecture of primary forest, but the species composition is, of course, entirely human-centered. And so we're getting the food, the fuel, the fiber, the fodder, the marketable crops, the medicinal crops, the timber, fuel wood out of it, while at the same time the land is replicating ecosystem functions of soil and soil moisture retention, habitat creation, and the big one that everybody's talking about right now, carbon sequestration. So it's not a binary if this, not that thing. We've got both. So Vincent and I talked, and one of the things I'm supposed to give some advice to farmers, and what I'll say is this sort of represents the model that we took. On the far right, you follow the blue line. We've cataloged about 400 species of plants. We know we have another 100 some odd species of medicinals and ornamentals in there. We used to have a list. And then down on the left is the green line that goes really small. If you have a lot of species, you have limited market access for any one. Most farmers, if you have large acreage, are going to go with 1 or 2 species or maybe 3 species, and they're going to have very high market access for those species. The problem with these, particularly if it's only 1 or 2 species, is that such farms are inherently biologically unstable. You can get a pathogen of some kind, either fungi or bacteria, or a virus like Tristeza virus in citrus, or bunchy top virus in bananas, or Phytophthora manila in cacao, or Panama disease in bananas. And you're very vulnerable if you only have 1 or 2 species. Additionally, you're financially very vulnerable, because if your market is entirely locked up in a few species and the market goes bad, like when the citrus market went bad, I think for like a year, I didn't do anything but drink orange juice. I didn't drink anything but orange juice if there are oranges. So, and how much oranges can somebody drink? So this is the choice that young farmers that are looking into going forward is which way to go, because there's a sweet spot in there where you have market access and high diversity, instead of going all the way out on the deep end like us with too many species, although we have specialized in a few things. I'm a gigantic fan of cacao. It is my absolute favorite species of plant, and cacao is both native to the area that we live in. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. It does really well here, and Belize, there's an insatiable market for Belizean cacao. We produce exceptional quality cacao, both in the quality of the cacao being harvested, because it tends to be coming from small holders, but also in the genetics of it. There's a lot of cacao here that's been here for a long time. Cacao is a subcanopy species, similar to things like coffee or vanilla, and vanilla is also native to this area, and you'll see some of that. But I just love cacao because it functions at the ground level while there's a complex agroforestry system above it that is dropping different kinds of food. This is some cacao. This is some cacao we collected deep in the Maya Mountains at a Maya site called Exush and Muclebal up in the Bladen watershed. It's a very rare cultivar, makes exceptional chocolate. And that's what it looks like. You can see the beans on the inside are white. And we have a very good preferential market to it. We have only 1 or 2 buyers who buy our cacao. And we do okay with that. It's, part of our diversified revenue stream. We roast it traditionally, and we grind it in a sort of a grinder, and we make traditional cacao balls, and we drink a lot of that. That's a traditional favorite. That's what Maya people do it, in the way that Maya people do it. And we live in a Maya community, so that is the way I've learned to do it. So I worked for 7 years, from 1997 to 2004. I worked at the Toledo Cacao Growers Association in nearby Punta Gorda town. And we worked with about 20 different communities in the area, predominantly Mopan Maya and Kekchi Maya. And what we did was we did centralized purchasing for smallholders. And this is a really good strategy for a state like Hawaii, where most farmers are going to be relatively small because the price of land is very high. And no one farmer may be able to access markets to sell their crop. But by banding together through a farmers association or cooperative, you can access markets. And that's what we did. And that is the handsome fellow standing in the door is me when I was 30 something. Anyway, where'd my hair go? Yeah. This is what our cacao looked like being exported. We had a very good control mechanism. We could trace exactly whose cacao went into what bag, because the way we loaded it led for good accountability, because the Toledo Cacao Growers Association was the first fair trade and organic certified cacao producer in the world. There were other organic cacao producers, but we basically stepped in to create the fair trade market. It was a really exciting time. So this is the sort of the model of the district where I live, and you can see all little dots are where all the villages are. Many of them either have very poor roads, some of them have no roads. That's changed now. We're getting roads into most of the villages, which is both good and bad. And so what we did is we had like a hub where Punta Gorda town was the spoke that reached out into all of these different communities to access cacao. It is a model that I think would work in a state like Hawaii, where smallholders could band together. Before I go on with this, I'd just like to say that many of the problems that about 12 years ago, I had the occasion to think about what it would look like if I left here. And I started thinking about where I could move if I was going to move. And I looked at the possibility of Hawaii, and some of the problems that I identified with Hawaii was number one, cost of living was very high. But the other one is that it's very isolated for food. Belize has many of the same problems that you have in terms of food. Our economy is largely dependent on tourism. And as a result, the traditional pre-tourism industries of forestry, fisheries, and agriculture have largely been sidelined in favor of tourism. And we revealed in 2008 how vulnerable that was when the housing bubble burst. And now with COVID, we have massive unemployment. We have a degree of desperation we've never had before because there's just no money coming into the country. Anyway, in addition to that, we're all dealing with what does climate change look like? Well, let me finish that before I go on. So part of it is that we're very food insecure. The best land in the country is geared for export. So mainly citrus and bananas and sugarcane in the north. And basically smallholders tend to get either land that's marginal or land that is not accessible, or they don't get the best land. The best land is for export. And as a result, we're exporting a fair amount of commodities, agricultural commodities, but we're not producing enough food. Moving on to this, our focus, when I left Toledo Cacao Growers in 2004, I formed Maya Mountain Research Farm, which is the NGO on the farm that I have lived on since 1988. And I was talking while I was at Cacao Growers about climate change mitigation, like how do we draw down carbon, and cacao is a fantastic species for that because it needs a canopy. And it also creates sources of revenue and streams of income for smallholders that don't involve deforestation. So drawdown.org, or Project Drawdown, has a list of different ways to draw down carbon, and I've kind of listed them all here. The ones with stars on them, all of them that I've marked are ones that are presently going on in Belize and that we're involved with. The ones with stars on them are the ones that I think are probably the most important. They're the low-hanging fruit on dealing with that. So we were kind of ahead of the curve talking about this in even before 2004 when I started MMRF. In 2019, we won, the farm won an award. I was invited to London to get an award, and I have to just show this picture of me and Prince Harry because I'm bragging. But it was honestly a big validation for my life's work. And the young man that's standing behind me and behind Prince Harry is my stepson, Wilfredo Magana, who was an officer cadet at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst and took a day off to come into London and meet with us. And Prince Harry broke protocol to walk over and talk to us because I mentioned to him that my stepson was at Sandhurst, and Prince Harry had attended Sandhurst. And just before we move on, I will say he is absolutely as nice as you would like to believe he is. Moving on. So in the very beginning, when we were taking out the citrus, we didn't know exactly what we wanted. We knew kind of what we wanted, but we needed something to provide for us in the immediate short term. So we came up with a list of what we call pioneer species as sort of a first successional guild, plants that go in and give us a yield within 2 years and provide a service like, for example, cassava in the foreground breaks up the soil. Bananas themselves don't change the chemistry of the soil, but they improve the structure of the soil. Chaya provides shade, and they all provide a yield very quickly. Things like Kajan or pigeon pea break up the soil and fix nitrogen. This was actually in 2019 when we were having that really hard drought, and the pigeon pea did really well when the red kidney beans and the black beans failed. Absolute champion of food security right there. We grow pineapples on contour to control erosion and biomass, lay down biomass on the uphill side. And this is a future coconut dominated polyculture. I've got a little bit of an obsession with coconuts. So this is going to be eventually a palm dominant polyculture. We've got coconut in there. We have some date palms up at the top of the hill where it dries quickly. We've got peach palm, or the Bactris gassipace, which is or Pejibaya, which is a traditional food mostly in South America and point south. It's actually native to just where we are. We're right at the northern end of its range. And things like acai berry, which is from Brazil, but we've know somebody who grows it here and does well with it, so we have a little bit of that. But this is early successional stage. This is after about a year. This is one of the cultivars of banana we have, and this is Jamaica Red Banana. That's my wife standing there to give you some scale. And the Jamaica Red Banana is super productive. It produces a lot of biomass, which we can use for mulching and creating barriers on slopes to accumulate soil. And it's growing. This area here is surrounded by trees. And this is actually one of the areas that was most damaged when we bought the land. It had suffered from both a combination of sheet erosion and gully erosion, and now it's fairly productive. These are some of the bananas we grow. On the left, we have Pijang banana. Then in the middle is apple banana. To the far right is the Jamaica Red, and the one above that is Blogo banana. Blogo banana is primarily a cooking banana, and they're all fantastic bananas. We have about 12 different cultivars of bananas that we grow. Now, one of the big things, we're very strong into tropical staple trees as a way to create food security. They are much less vulnerable to seasonal inundation or unexpected floods, or even to drought. They are able to access moisture and nutrients that short-lived grasses like rice or corn are unable to reach. This is the Artocarpus clemensi, which is closely related to the Artocarpus altilis, or breadfruit, which came from your guys' neck of the woods. This was brought into the Caribbean by the English in the 1700s, late 1700s, and to feed the slaves who didn't much care for it. And as a result, it spread all throughout the Caribbean. We eat a fair amount of it. We like it a lot. This is another one. This is called Ramon nut. It's also called bread nut. The Latin name is Brassomum malacastrum. And this is also called Maya nut. It is a seed that the ancient Maya used to eat when you're wandering around lost in the jungles of the Maya Mountains, like I used to do back in my 20s. You frequently find these in high density close to Maya sites. So if you see a bunch of them above you, you start looking at the ground, you're going to see a terrace or a house mound or pottery shards or something. And it is can produce up to 7.5 tons per acre. And all of these crops actually produce a huge amount of food at a very favorable ratio of energy returned on energy invested. And also I use the Latin names because the common names in many of these, for example, bread nut and bread nut are two different species. One is an Artocarpus and the other one is the Brassomum malacastrum. But I also like to use the Latin name because it makes me look smart. This is the Pedgibaya, or peach palm, that we were talking about. It's a fantastic producer. This was also in 2019 during the drought. And this is our friend Marlon Sutherland, who was with us for about a year. He and I went out walking one morning after coffee and collecting some food. And so we collected some coconut and some pineapple and some bananas. And we collected this in about 45 minutes. We never went more than about 200 meters from the house. And so we didn't actually spend a lot of energy collecting it. Off camera, which you can't see, we have 2 buckets of the Artocarpus clemensi bread nut, which is important for us because we eat it and we also feed it to our poultry. And when we were raising pigs, we fed it to pigs. Poultry animals are a good way to slow the movement of nutrients through a landscape. We love our chickens. We have chickens and we have ducks. And these are some chickens eating termites that I collected and I brought to them. They are what we call accumulators. They eat things that we don't want to eat because, you know, I have to say I did try termites. They taste kind of nutty, but I can't imagine sitting down to a bowl of them. Chickens will eat that and convert that to us as eggs and meat if you eat meat. Another way to slow the movement of nutrients through the farm and get additional yields is biogas. So in 2019, we had a biogas training episode hosted by a friend of ours named Kathy Puffer from Solar Cities, which is an organization that promotes biogas. And we built a biogas plant that runs off of food waste. So it basically, when we're making coconut oil, some of the whey from making the coconut milk feeds it. So the chicken manure feeds it. Banana peels and pineapple skins and damaged fruit feeds it. It's a very good way, and the effluent from it is highly valuable fertilizer. Marketable understory agroforgery products include things like ginger. With COVID, we sold about 2,000 pounds of ginger this last year because everybody wants to have ginger. This is some turmeric there with Selene there, and Amber Albee, who's sitting back there. And of course, our good friend Bernie Sanders, who just happened to stop by, you know, to help us out. Yeah. Yeah. So another high value subcanopy species is vanilla. We are in an area where vanilla is native. Vanilla has gone up to $500 US for a pound, which is a lot more than my neighbors who still try to go ganja can get for their ganja. It is another subcanopy species that does well in a multi-strata agroforestry system, and it has very high value. we're coming towards the very end, so that we can have the discussion. And forest or farm, and as I said in the beginning, it's not an either or thing. With a combination of careful design work and intention and time, we can create agricultural models that replicate the form and function of primary habitat, while also providing the yields that we need, both to eat and both to sell and market, to provide us with the income that we need to live in the world that we live in. And that would be my takeaway for this, is that you can create a food model that isn't inherently cashing in on the past and cannibalizing the future, like most agriculture is today. And I think, and then the last thing I wanted to cover, because Vincent and I talked about this, is off-farm income. Because even with all the species that we have, we don't necessarily make all the money that we would like off of the income we generate from the farm. So my wife and I, we do some photovoltaic installations, primarily in protected areas and in schools in rural communities. We've installed photovoltaic battery-based systems in 15 schools. We've worked in, I think, about 13 different protected areas, and we've built 2 village-level photovoltaic water pumping systems, as well as, you know, a few dozen small DC lighting systems. So thank you very much. I've come to the end of my presentation, and then I guess we can go to question and answer and hear from my co-panelists. Thank you.
Christopher, there's a question for you in the chat feature.
Okay.
I'm getting ready to buy land and start a farm here in Hawaii. What resources do you recommend for figuring out a farm design like this?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would look to what we call in Belize, we call the older heads. And the older heads are people who've been farming for a while. And I took pictures out of 2 people that I worked with, because I didn't know how much time I would have to get through this. But when I worked at Toledo Cacao Growers, we started out with 225 members. By the time I left 7 years later, we had 750 members. Out of those, there were many farmers that were doing truly remarkable stuff. One is my good friend, the late Mr. Pablo Cal, who did citrus organically, and he raised bees and he had cacao. And the other one was my neighbor halfway down the river to the village, Mr. Saul Garcia, who had a truly amazing farm, in that the farm was truly marginal. It's very steep. In one area, we measured out, in a 25 meter by 25 meter area, we measured out 22 species useful to him, not including the cacao. And in the cacao, there were 3 cultivars. So I would look to people that are older and have been doing it for a while, and see what you can learn from them. That's what worked for me.
Yeah, go ahead. Christopher, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good, thank you. What a great presentation, brother. I mean, to do it in such a short time that you did, you really covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much. I'm trying to, I don't know if John's on. Katie, is John on?
He sure is.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So what we want to do is, folks, we want to have John be able to give a presentation, because we wanted to have a Hawaii perspective, and John's rocking it on Kauai. And so then after John presents, we want to have a Q&A for both these gentlemen. So this way, everybody who, you know, is looking at going down the path of doing this form of agriculture, and either making a living or supplementing their living, can not have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and have a resource to be able to tap into. And so, John, if you would like to boot up, I do have some questions for Christopher, but I'll hold off on that when you both are done, and then we can also, you know, get into a Q&A on this. So thanks so much, Christopher. Right on. We'll see you in a few minutes.
There's yeah, one more question for Christopher. Christopher, Fawn Helikahi asked, is your wife a native to Belize, and how much traditional knowledge did she add to your farm?
My wife is native to Belize. She is a unique mixture of Belizean. She is part Yucatec Maya, part East Indian from India, and she's got some mestizo Spanish mix in her. And she bought a lot. One of the things that she did is before she met me, she was a pharmacist. And so she's been very interested in medicinal plants, and she has actually been focusing on collecting and curating and managing our medicinal plant species.
Amazing. Thanks, Christopher. And then one last question for you. Does agroforestry require more water than a regular farm system?
No. Agroforestry, you can do regular farming while you're getting it established. And the thing is, once the agroforestry system is established, it will require a lot less water because it will be holding and retaining moisture in the landscape that annual crops, particularly grasses like sugarcane or rice or corn, are incapable of holding. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Reba, is that on? I got you. Okay, so we're working on our audio from here. We appreciate if the audio is coming across or not. So if you're not hearing the audio clearly from the room to Zoom Central here, please let us know. We want to make sure that you get all the audio content that's available to you. John, my Paisan brother there from Kauai.
Good morning. How's my audio? Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, hearing you great. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I definitely want to send out a big mahalo. I was kind of a last minute invite here. I have a sense that Vince just picked me because we have similar hairstyles above any other qualifications I might have. And I don't have much of an audio visual presentation today. Anybody who's tuning in here from Hawaii knows that the weather in the last week hasn't really been conducive to video or photography. So anyway, I do have a short video I want to show a little bit later. But anyway, I just wanted to, today my discussion is going to be surrounding the work that I've been most recently involved in, which is essentially the integration of animal systems within agroforestry here on Kauai. I've been farming here on Kauai for about 25 years. Before I begin that discussion, I just kind of want to give a quick 30-second sort of context, little bit of a global status report, just to get everybody, just to kind of set the context for some of our discussions. And it might be just a little bit of my devious nature to begin an address to a collective of farmers by offering this as a basis of understanding from which we're going to proceed. But basically, it's just the recognition that agriculture is the most destructive human activity on planet Earth. It's by far the biggest threat to biodiversity. It uses the most dangerous chemicals, biocides, chemicals by their very design to kill living things. Disastrous impact of fresh water, which is arguably our most threatened natural resource. And of course, the climate concerns, the tilling of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and the methane emissions from factory animal farms, and on and on. Aside from the ecological impacts, the social considerations of agriculture are even arguably worse for at least the human inhabitants of the planet. Long history of land theft and disposition. Certainly Hawaiians have some experience with that. But these things continue to this day. On top of that, we have really shameful labor practices, including the enslavement of children, which has come out in the chocolate industry in the recent months and years. And then finally, the health concerns, more and more mass production, the processing, the mass processing of food is directly impacting the biggest killers in diet-related diseases such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, some cancers. And again, all of this is in the name of profit and progress. And despite the advances we've made globally on production, it's still, again, all of this is in the name of on production. Getting a little bit of delay here. I don't know if that's coming through, but anyway, despite these advances in production, you know, it's estimated that between 1 and 2 billion people are still chronically hungry. So essentially, globalized agriculture is just epically failing humanity. It's starving billions in the third world. It's sickening billions in the first world. It's making the already obscenely wealthy few even more obscenely wealthy. And it's also all the while killing the prospects for any kind of organized human life for future generations. So to start on that positive note, I'm basically just want to have a provocation here as growers to ask ourselves, what is the part we play in this machine, this agricultural machine that's careening towards apocalypse? In permaculture, we have a concept called the problem is the solution. And again, I think I can think of no better example of this concept than the impacts that agriculture has on the natural world. So again, part of the reason that agriculture is the most destructive activity is because it's the most impactful interface between human beings and the rest of the natural world. So also herein lies a massive potential for transformative power for positive change. Chris stole a little bit of my fire by getting deep into Paul Hawkins' Project Drawdown. Again, it's at drawdown.org. It's really worth the time to go through that site and check out it's all solutions based, incredible amounts of research. I really highly recommend it. Chris pointed out a bunch of agricultural solutions from that site. I'd like to actually just highlight 4 of different ones actually. And those 4 are managed grazing, agroforestry, perennial staple cropping. So thinking about ulu here, perennial carbohydrate non-tillable crops, and regenerative annual cropping. So just these 4 practices, and again, these are not the only 4 agricultural solutions presented in this climate change solution site, but just these 4 practices have the potential, with conservative, realistic scaling over the next 25 years, to sequester more than 100 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere. Now, to give some context there, that is basically more impactful for carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than transitioning our energy sector to utility scale solar and wind combined, right? So again, that's just an illustration of how impactful the agricultural practices that we adopt have on climate change. So again, preaching to the choir a little bit here, I know, but again, just following this sort of the idea of ecological agriculture, farm as an ecosystem. I think just the basic recognition that our agricultural areas are the closest thing to natural human habitat that we have. And if we start to recognize that even with destructive agricultural practices, these are still ecosystems. Destructive and unproductive ones potentially, but they're still ecosystems. For better or for worse, we are transforming the surface of the planet with agriculture. So we all know that ecological ag, sustainable ag, regenerative ag, these are not new concepts. These are woven into a rich history of sophisticated agricultural systems from diverse cultures across the planet. Here in Hawaii, of course, we have the Ahupua'a system. In the greater Pacific, we have incredible examples of subsistence agroforestry systems. And, some of the latest in the last couple of years have come out with research that's shown that indigenous tribes in the Amazon have been, quote unquote, cultivating the rainforest for over 13,000 years. Okay, so there are definitely, we have these examples of systems where we're working with nature and becoming nature. Kind of a more contemporary example here in Hawaii as an ecosystem-based production model would be the grass-fed beef industry. And here on Kauai, we drive by it all the time on the side of the road. We see the cows, we see the pasture, the legumes, the haulikoa. Again, when this is done right, this is an absolutely regenerative practice that is modeled after the grassland grazing ruminant animal ecosystem that have co-evolved in many places around the world. So again, these systems are here. They've been here all along. And again, I'm willing to bet that everyone listening today is probably practicing, all the growers here today are practicing some level of the basic principles of regenerative agriculture, whether it be, keeping our soil covered with mulch or living plants and cover crops, or minimizing the soil disturbance through, minimizing how much tillage we're doing, certainly planting a diversity of crops, keeping a living root system year round. Again, a lot of these are second nature for us because, here we have a year round growing season anyway. And again, I think that, this concept of regenerative agriculture in my mind is that we have industrial, as examples, we have industrial agriculture or sort of mainstream conventional agriculture that is always, it's fighting against nature. In my mind, we have things like organic farming, which is working with nature, which is, using, beneficial insects and, working with nature. And then I think regenerative agriculture, in my mind, in its best form, is actually becoming nature, right? We're becoming hunter-gatherers in the agroforestry or the forestry systems or the production systems that we're designing. One of the final principles of regenerative ag, though, is this concept of animal integration, which again is kind of getting into the main topic of my presentation today. So for farmers, for growers, it's where is our fertility coming from, right? And this also plays into the quote unquote plant-based diet sort of craze that we we find ourselves in today. And it's plant-based diet. It really that actually bothers me a lot because it's a very superficial, oversimplified look at our diet's effect on the ecology of the planet. Certainly, plants don't just materialize in the supermarket, and as growers, we know that plants don't just materialize on the farm either. Well, I guess aside from like guinea grass and things like that, those do materialize pretty well. But certainly the food crops that we're growing are not just popping out of the ground here. And if you're going to look at the basis of your diet, you have to dig a little bit deeper than just saying I have a plant-based diet. And if you dig deeper, that's where you come into, okay, what's creating these plants is the fertility in our soil. Again, this is all basic stuff, but just to try to get some context here. So if we're moving forward with the soil fertility is the basis of our diet, and as growers, it's the basis of our production systems, then we need to dig a little bit deeper into where our fertility is coming from. I was joking around a little bit with Vince last week about, 10 or 12 years ago when I made a shift from a little bit more productive or production agriculture, doing farmers markets and CSA more regularly. There's a moment where I just come to this, sort of existential place where, I'm importing chicken manure from the mainland, and I'm turning that into local food. And, I'm a hero at the farmer's market for doing it. And, it just became, it's like, I've become a chicken shit magician. I'm converting chicken manure. I mean, of course, I'm composting, I'm cover cropping, I'm remineralizing, compost teas, all that stuff. Yet when it really comes down to like the fuel for the fire. Essentially that was my, that was my big input. That was my input. And, let's face it, organic farmers rely heavily on factory farms for cheap nitrogen to fuel the fire of our production. So as we discuss integrating animals into the system, well, first off, it's, this isn't a discussion on the morality of consuming animals. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about a science-based discussion on how our food is produced, right? So, so if we come to this place, okay, so if the soil fertility is what's producing our food, okay, so if we're using conventional fertilizers, then the basis of our fertility in a soil is fossil fuels, because that's where synthetic fertilizers are produced with, right? If we're using organic inputs, then the basis of our fertility is often factory farmed animals or unsustainable extractive fishery models, okay? So when we got to do better than that, right? So when we're talking about the integration of animals into regenerative agriculture, we're really just balancing an equation here, okay? Because on most organic farms, even if there's no living animals on the farm, the manure, the animal products are still there, okay? And they're an integral part. They're a necessary part. I will, I'll talk a little bit about legumes right now. Yes, of course, cover crops, leguminous cover crops. We have lots of nitrogen fixing trees. And again, this importance for biomass is important for nitrogen in the soil. However, in my experience, you can grow all the nitrogen cover crops you want. In other words, without the addition of animal nitrogen, it's really hard to get a high productive annual cropping system, for example. So my proposition here today is, how do we design systems that provide a backbone of food security and resilience to the island, that also integrate high value crops for value added chains for export, while minimizing the need for imported inputs? Okay, so that's what brings us to the work that I've been doing recently, which is agroforestry with animal integration. So certainly after soil testing and remineralizing, correcting for mineral deficits, the question is, can mulched leguminous nitrogen fixing trees and mulch, plus the rotation of multi-species grazing, keep an abundance of production without outside inputs? Okay. And before I get too much into agroforestry models and things, I have to give a shout out to the pioneers that have come before me and are still my teachers today. 20 years ago, working with John Edson here on Kauai, of course, Craig Elovich, whose contributions to this body of work are just off the charts, thousands and thousands of pages of instructional material, books, photography. Here on Kauai, I just want to shout out for Paul Massey and Ray Maki and Kauai Food Forest. I mean, these are all my teachers and my contemporaries, but just to recognize the amazing work. And then obviously, globally, looking at the work of Ernst Gotch in his concept of syntropic agroforestry and successional agroforestry models. I really think that we're on the cusp of having massive a leap of understanding in these areas. And I think there's lots of examples of agroforestry: plant a bunch of trees, a bunch of understory, and there you go. You treat it sort of like a diverse orchard. But I think when we really start to dig deeper into successional agroforestry and deeper ecology, we're trying to put the reductionist scientific mind behind for a minute and look at some deep ecology. In permaculture, we talk about thoughtful and protracted observation, and really start to ask the questions of, what are the lessons we can learn from intact forests, right? Paul Stamets was on my farm 20 years ago talking about how plants can communicate with trees are communicating with each other using mycorrhizal networks. And at the time, that was like that was fringe. That was a fringe bordering like pseudoscience, right? But, you know, in the last couple of years, no, that's exactly what's going on, right? The wood wide web that it's been called. So we're gaining massive understanding. The big questions that we need answered are, how do we manage this succession of creating forests, right? Accelerating, using nature's operating instructions. How do we accelerate this succession and manage for yield and system reliance, right? So how do we design for the health of the forest itself and design for the taking of outputs, right? How do we balance outputs with, again and again, because, you know, it's not just for human sustenance that we're doing, this is also for human economies. So there's a really delicate balance there, and there's so much practice that needs to be done. There's so much more, you know, there's so much more learning. I learn every day, every week that goes by. There's something that's learned by the interactions. Again, when you're dealing with an ecosystem based agricultural model, you know, the interconnectedness there, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It's a massive source of inspiration and learning. So again, it's not just a succession, it's a succession it's like niches in space and time. So it's not really the end product of a food forest that is regenerative, but it's also the mechanism, or it is the way that we get there that's regenerative. So we're modeling after the succession in nature. And the piece that I've been working with most recently is working with a phased establishment of an agroforestry model with animals. So it's an idea of taking whatever the long-term plan is in terms of acreage, cutting it into eighths or tenths, and planting a yearly 1/8 or 1/10, so that the establishment is a phased establishment. And after a length of time, potentially 8 years or 10 years, there's a return to the first block of establishment, with a deep pruning and the reestablishment of a more complex understory.
Hey, John, you got 5 minutes, please, and we can wrap up, and then we'll get into the Q&A. We'll do Christopher.
Perfect. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna just I'm gonna start this short video right now. I'm gonna share my screen, and just to give some pictures of what we're talking about. So basically, this is a couple of months in on a small or a young agroforest. So we have a lot of young trees, a lot of nurse trees. You can see pigeon pea here. There's an avocado, and we have a lot of integration of annual vegetables in here. So we have tomatoes, broccoli, cabbage, lettuce, peppers. These are all growing right around young pigeon pea and nurse plants. And again, it just yields right away. So again, this right here, this is about 6 or 7 months in. We have a lot of Hawaiian favorites here, such as ulu and kava, taro, mamaki. These are growing along Amazon rainforest specimens. Again, still annuals in the understory here. Pepeao mushrooms that are introduced. Lots of production palms, peach palms, lots of nitrogen fixers, Inga, Gluricidia, lots of pigeon pea. And again, so with the integration of animals, for example, now we have we have some mobile chicken houses. Again, these chickens were actually fed since day one, baby chicks. They've been fed fermented, completely off the farm, fermented ulu, black soldier fly larvae for protein and pasture. And again, this system was designed more for broiler chickens. But again, when you look at these tractors, for example, parked next to an ulu tree, again, because their diet is based on the farm, you can see this beautiful like circular economy essentially of, you know, chickens feeding trees, trees feeding chickens. And as we move through, we have some grazing cattle in this system too. These are dairy cows. Again, they are providing an incredible amount of environmental services here. You know, they eat Gluricidia leaves, they're eating tea leaves and sugarcane. Through the action of dung beetles, they are increasing the percolation of the pasture. They're keeping the fly population down by being followed by chickens. They're improving the pasture, storing carbon in the soil. And again, the lactobacillus culture from their milk is being used as biological pest control on things like tomatoes, and is also a prebiotic for the chicken's lactofermentation. So again, ecologically based thinking, this is interconnectedness wherever you look. And, you know, it's really hard to put this stuff on a balance sheet. You know, it's like writing a business plan for a rainforest. So again, you know, coming back to, you know, the last piece I was going to discuss was some of the infrastructure, and maybe this can happen in Q&A. I don't want to go over too much. I've got a couple of minutes here, I think, but basically, you know, as we start talking about, you know, the positive changes that can happen, you know, it's, you know, I'm not suggesting some kind of romantic fairy tale of a neo-agrarian utopia where the people of Hawaii are sitting around, you know, one large table eating steamed breadfruit and Malabar spinach. But what I think we really need to look at is revolutionizing our food systems, right? So something that is incentivizing ecologically sound agriculture, right? Something like incubator, accelerator programs that are helping farmers become entrepreneurs and value-added producers. I think if COVID had any silver lining at all, it is the you know, recognition and the deep understanding that people, the local people, the value that they saw in locally produced food. Things like CSAs entering the popular lexicon, you know, so, you know, even Auntie Pua is trying to figure out what to do with kohlrabi every week. Again, this is a big part of resilience too, right? This animal integration, because as valuable as local food is, if the inputs that are necessary to create that local food are coming from thousands of miles away, then, you know, you can't really talk about local food being food security and resilience if the necessary inputs are being shipped in. So we really need, and again, this is going to involve cooperatives. I think, you know, a big question for me is, you know, what does a cooperative look like between a grass-fed beef producer, a rancher, an agroforester, someone who's focused on trees and tree crops, and an annual vegetable producer? You know, how can they co-manage a piece of land and again, feed each other and support each other? Again, all of those systems would benefit greatly from working together. You know, the final thing I'm just going to leave you with is I just gave a tour of an agroforestry site just the other day. Very intelligent person who I was business mind who I was touring around, and his challenge to me, his question to me was, okay, this is amazing. This concept is great, but this concept has to have financial and economic viability. It has to be able to compete economically with the status quo if it's going to be adopted on a larger scale. And you know, I sat with that for a few days, and again, I'll leave you with this, is because, you know, it really bothered me because I didn't have that answer. And again, certainly monocrops can show economic viability really quickly, right? But again, I think there's 2 points to that, right? When we start to talk about transition to regenerative and sustainable systems. Number one is the agricultural socialism that is happening right now to agribusiness, okay, to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. That is going primarily to the large processors and manufacturers. And, you know, I mean, it, like I said, it's a corporate monopolized, you know, pork barrel, right? So you can't compare, you know, a small diversified farmer to, you know, to Cargill, okay? Just because of the agricultural subsidies alone. Number two, with these corporate models, they completely externalize the cost of destroying the biosphere, okay? So where does that enter the balance sheet, okay? So in other words, how can you look at two economic models and put them on the same playing field if one of them is destroying the prospect for human civilization in the near future and one that's attempting to solve it? I hope we get a chance to talk about some statewide infrastructure discussions about subsidies and long-term leasing. I hope we're going to talk about that in the Q&A, but I'll turn it over to Vince. And again, I just want to say a lot of thanks for being able to participate this morning.
John, what a wonderful, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Oh, great. What a wonderful presentation, my brother. Really, between you and Chris, I can see why in our earlier conversations that I was so taken by you both. And so one question I have for both of you is right now, just if we can elaborate on, as you know, I'm kind of a soil health geek. And when you went into your areas, and John, seeing that video of your area that you're working at, that just really raised my spirits big time. So thank you. I'm sure the folks that are tuning in that also value.
Yeah, just as a disclaimer, that was like shot with my iPhone. So yeah.
No, but you know, what really was telling to me was the vitality, not only in the plant life, but also the animal life, and how you have a whole system of agriculture being created in that respect. That's what I'm speaking to. And it moved my spirit in a big way. And one of the things that both of you folks, I'm sure, experienced, and I'll preface this by saying, you know, what the creator, whatever created all this, probably felt like, you know what, these humankind are going to be stupid. And so I really need to put in systems in place that could mitigate their stupidity along the way, and they're learning how to be in relationship with this place that we're calling Earth. And you know, when you folks went into your areas, your depleted areas, what you noticed, the first thing that you noticed, I would say, in confidence, is that you couldn't put your finger down into your soil, that it would just hit the top and that would be the end of it. Now, first of all, what are you noticing in your systems that is changing all that? That, you know, what do you notice in your soil? What the animals that are in your soil? What are you seeing the changes that's happening in the biosphere in that respect? And like you say, the balance sheet, when it equates to the balance sheet, if we're a system of people living on this planet that want to feed people, that want to take care of people, as what these governments are saying that they're all about now, and taking care of people's health and well-being, then why is that even on the balance sheet other than, you know, supporting it as a system that will feed people?
I'll answer that. Just that I noticed when I went here that there was almost no soil in much of the citrus. That the previous owner had kept them alive by basically feeding them fertilizer like a crackhead, and had basically kept them alive with that, and the soil was largely gone. The shot I showed of the banana with my wife standing there, that was one of the worst areas, and we were actually able to collect and maintain soil and build soil in that area by strategically planting out vetiver grass on contour and stuff like that. And we've started to accumulate soil, but for us, because we're focused mostly on tree crops. Now the trees have created this interlocking web of roots and dropping leaf litter, and we've got it. But that in the very beginning, that was a real challenge. And there are sections in the old part of the pasture that still, 33 years down the line, don't do particularly well. I mean, we're actually now we're just beginning to actually be able to plant things like coffee in there, which is subcanopy species. But when we kind of jumped the gun and planted mango trees and stuff in there, they just didn't do well. And now we're seeing improvement. And there's a combination of time and the passing of seasons and biological activity in the plants that are planted there building soil. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to just frame this within the context of my discussion around animals too. But cows get a bad rap, right? But I think that, for example, I mentioned really briefly when I was racing through the end of my presentation, but just the action of the deposit of one cow pie on the soil, okay? You have dung beetles that come in. Again, this is provided that you're not using chemical warmers and you're not using, poisons or whatever. So anyway, you have, dozens and dozens of dung beetles attack one. So if you think of it as like 1 square foot of cow manure, these dung beetles come in, they excavate 16 plus inches into the soil, okay? In a tunnel that's about, 3/8 or a half inch in diameter. They excavate all the way down to the subsoil. They pull that up and they ball up the manure and they bring it down to the base of that tunnel. You look at a cow deposit, you can see the holes. You can see them. There's dozens of them. I've counted 70 in one cow pie, right? There's a lot of farmers here today. I challenge you. Can you think of the engineering behind a tractor implement that could achieve that same goal of basically not just, driving 70 stakes into the ground and compacting at the base of it, but actually excavating those holes. Okay, so you're increasing oxygen into the soil level. You're bringing fertility and biology into the subsoil. And then when it rains, and again, the area that I'm working at right now gets 100 inches of rain over the course of the year. We've probably just got about 6 inches of rain in the last week. It's like, so it also increases the percolation of the rain and decreases surface runoff. So in other words, if we can harness these biological processes that the animals provide to us for free, and we get ice cream on top of it, let's do that. Yes, because basically, again, it's not, when cows get a bad rap, it's not the cow, it's the how. And that's our responsibility. So you put them in a factory, you're going to get problems. You put them where they belong, and you're going to get massive benefit.
Chuck Walters from Acres USA, the founder of Acres USA, came into a keynote presentation on a Saturday night to introduce Jerry Brunetti. And he said to the crowd, a couple of dung beetles came into a bar and they sat on a stool. And then everybody was waiting, and then they got it. So I can't see the Q&A. Is there any questions, Katie, that are in for our presenters?
Not currently. Does anyone have any questions?
I got a question.
Drake has a question. Go ahead, Drake.
How resilient do you think your systems are to rising fuel prices?
How resilient are your systems to the rising fuel prices?
We use virtually no fuel. We have a chainsaw for dealing with wood, and that's about it. And actually, that's not true. We have a weed whacker, but like a strimmer, but we don't use it very often. That's usually used in a couple times a year around certain areas where the canopy hasn't closed. And then we don't have a road, so everything goes in and out by a dugout canoe. So for us, the actual farming aspect, petroleum has very little role in it directly.
And John, you want to grab?
Yeah, I mean, same thing here. I mean, you know, the systems that that I'm working with, is a couple of passes with the tractor when you actually plant, and that's it. I mean, there's no mechanical, and again, actually, I'm starting to make a conversion to battery operated chainsaws and small engines, chainsaws, weed whackers and stuff. And, if you're, I mean, I'm off the grid at home, so, you're charging your batteries off the sun. So you're like, so your chainsaw is like solar powered in a way, it's kind of it's nice technologies, we got to use the technology that's coming on. It's helpful.
So there's some here. Let's see. What about water? Does this require more water than a regular farm system?
We answered that before, and no, actually, the agroforestry requires less, and it actually helps in retaining water as it gets progressively older.
So there's a question for you, John. For John. Can you comment on the size of the area planted with cows and chickens in your video? Cost to implement that area. As a or an add-on to that, are you where your chicken tractors are and your cows are you then turning those alleyways into your agroforestry and then turning back your agroforestry areas back to animals? Are you doing that kind of development like that, or?
Yeah. So the plan is that, certainly there is, there's a mix between short-term, medium-term, long-term specimens all woven within there. The long-term specimens, there's a very distinct design there. There's an architecture of that forest that's very well planted out and spaced, and with understory, I mean, long-term understory as well. However, in the grass strips, which are about 20, I think they're 20 feet, 20, maybe they're 25 feet. No, they're 20 feet. Those grass pasture strips are 20 feet wide. So they were calculated to allow for a couple of chicken tractors to pass by each other. And also to give enough space to make it sense for cows to graze in there too. Now, over time, the canopy is going to close in. The grass is going to retreat away from the more shaded areas. So over time, what's going to happen is we'll probably end up going down to one chicken tractor. And then at some point in the evolution, again, it's a phased design, right? So at some point, years 5 or 6 or something, there's probably not going to be quite enough grass there maybe for cows to be able to graze there effectively to make it a lot of sense. However, at year 8 or 10, like I said, when we come through and do a massive pruning, it's going to open up the light again and opportunity to regraze that section. And again, this is an experimental plot. So, there's probably going to be additional integration of understory plants in, where those cows were grazing essentially. So the cows are almost an intermediate step.
Cool, great. And what are your markets and your marketing prospects for your land, for your operations?
You want me to take? You talking to me specifically?
Guys, both of you guys.
All right, well, Chris, why don't you go first again? That's fine.
All right. Well, so as I said, we have these two curves, lots of species, small market. So we specialize in things. So we sell our cacao. We sell a little bit of coffee, mostly drink it, which means we don't have to buy coffee. We produce a lot of turmeric and we market that, and ginger. Those are things that we market as well. So those are the main things that we sell. When we have a big vegetable garden, and as we go into the dry season, we have a piece of seasonally inundated floodplain that we plant out to vegetables. Sometimes we sell some vegetables, but we're mostly focused on cacao and turmeric and ginger, because they have good markets that just readily absorb any amount that we can provide.
And as far as having animals on your farm, I remember you were mentioning that you have to deal with jaguars, right, coming in.
Well, we have all the cats: Jaguar, Ocelot, Puma, Margay, Jaguarundi. We had a little puppy that was going to be our future wonderful puppy, and a jaguar took her at about 8 o'clock at night and grabbed her from right next to the kitchen. And it was, it's tragic, but it's the world that we live in, and we're in their habitat So we also have a lot of poultry. We let our poultry free range. And John was talking about the services that dung beetles have. And I was thinking the same thing with poultry. If you walk around the farm when we're free ranging the poultry and see where all the little deposits of poultry manure are, and you had to replicate that with a bucket, you'd be doing this all day long trying to spread it. And they do a good job spreading it. They also convert insects and termites and worms and whatever they can find out there into food and also into manure. So it's the ecosystem service that they provide of both manuring and the product of manure itself. A very, very, very valuable thing. But John, I have to say I was super impressed. I have been convinced that there is no such thing as sustainable cows in the humid tropics. And I've been to like 600 different farms. I've never seen cattle raised the way you do. And I'm friends with people who do large-scale cattle in other places and regenerative grazing and management and all that. But I've never seen it. And if I ever make it to Hawaii, one of the points of light that I would like to see is your farm, because I really enjoyed seeing cattle in such a way where they're actually part of the solution and providing things. Like I put milk in my coffee every day. I like cheese on my pizza. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed your presentation.
Likewise, Chris, I'm so inspired by a lot of your great photography too. I'm really inspired by that. Yeah. Oh, I should also clarify that, some of the footage was there from my own personal homestead farm. And then some of the shots of the cows and chickens in Agroforestry together is at a site called Common Ground Kauai that I'm directing the ag up there right now. And again, the coming back to that question of markets, if you guys want to check out more about Common Ground Kauai, it's commongroundkauai.com. So it's there's actually a pretty good website to check out some of the things that are going on there and some of the mission and vision of that place. But essentially, that system is designed to feed that project. It's an 80-acre campus with a food innovation center that is going to have a world-class farm-to-table restaurant. We run incubator and accelerator programs, so we have a growing network of farm entrepreneurs who need product. We have construction plans for processing areas, value-added commercial kitchens, and then we have a retail space, distribution center, light industrial processing capability. So so that's most of the proposed market for that site is hyper localized to that resource center, Common Ground.
Well, what's beautiful about that, John, from my point of view, is because you deal and work in creating whole systems of agriculture, it's a no-brainer to be able to put together something like you're doing there for Common Ground. It just speaks to that encyclical, system of how nature works and emulating that architecture. So I'm really excited about to hear that. I think what's going to occur by hearing of this is that more and more of the private sector is going to want to invest in these kind of systems as a legacy investment. Because I want to continue to drive home the fact that the money that's out there, if they can have their name on it, that they were part of a system like this, I think that would be enough of a return on their investment. And so, I'm just wanting to beat that drum more and more. I feel that at the level we're working at the Board of Agriculture and with having the agricultural sector at the table with our soil health initiative, will give that voice, to where we can attract that private sector investment to do things like this. And so really appreciate both of you folks. Let me see, we got Jenny Kahahui saying, access to land and high cost in Hawaii for farmers, thoughts on long-term leases or other solutions. I know Jenny, I can answer that just off the top. Marketable on Maui is providing 2-acre parcels for the community at a cost of $150 an acre per year. And then water at 60 cents per 1,000 gallons, which is really a wonderful tool for community farmlands to be developed here on Maui. And they're putting in the fencing, so animals aren't an issue. Then they're putting in the windbreaks too. And then also use of their equipment at their cost. They'll come in and they'll do any equipment that's needed. So there's some of our FAM graduates. We have our FAM director with us this weekend at the convention, Sarah Gilligan. Some of our FAM graduates are leasing these lands from Marketable, and they're opening up 2, 5, and 10 acre opportunities for folks. So this is really, this is a wonderful thing to see occurring here as far as a cooperative effort moving forward. So look into that, Jenny, at Marketable's website. Let's see, are there any agricultural farms on Oahu to visit? That's Creighton asking that question. There are a number of, I would get in touch with Paul Isaac in Waimanalo at Yo Gardens. He's doing great farming there. Brings I'm Christian in Kahumana, yeah, absolutely. Kahumana Farm in Waianae. There's a lot of opportunities that are happening there on Oahu too to be able to check out. Ma'o Farms, right? And let me see, Jenny said she's been to Yo Garden. That's great. How can we contact John? Does he do consulting on Maui? We'd love to be in touch. It's Adam Hicks asking that question. John, if you could put your contact information in the chat, please. Let's see, Shannon Lush, residential novice farmer here on a ½ acre. Any tips? We'd love to make this the norm for smaller spaces. We'd love tips on best mix of plants, animals, goats, chicken, bees. Is a ½ acre enough room? Shannon, I make a living on 2,500 square feet. So, you work with what you got, and we can steer you in direction to be able to assist you in whatever you're looking at wanting to aspire to. Please, I hope you're a member of HFUU. If you're not, become one and get in the loop of all this educational outreach that we're providing. Any other questions here that I'm missing? I know Kaeo Ornalis, who's our County of Maui Ag Specialist, is on today, and he's been a big supporter of HFUU along the way. Really appreciate Kaeo, all the work you're doing, all the support you're throwing our way. Maui County has a grant right now, $25,000 grant for small family farmers to be able to tap into for infrastructure development. So I think that's open until December 15th, if I'm not mistaken. And people can apply for, and we got it last year. We finally were able to get tables made from a welder friend that now I can move all our tables around like a Rubik's Cube on our farm, as opposed to carrying trays from table to table. And so really appreciated the fact that that's upgraded our ability to farm and be successful at it. So we're winding down here, another 5 minutes. I'd like to turn it over to you two gentlemen. Just to give some closing remarks as to what you've seen and experienced today from both yourselves, and then in moving forward, know that this won't be the last time you present. You're in the family now. So thank you very much for being here today.
I guess I'll speak first since John is always letting me go off with my mouth before him. It's been an honor and a privilege to be here. As I'm always pleased that anybody cares about what we're doing here, and I'm really pleased to see John's presentation here and know that there are kindred spirits in Hawaii. In case Guatemala ever does come through in their claim to take over Belize, I may end up in Hawaii, and so I really appreciated that, and I appreciate that many of the challenges that you guys face in Hawaii are faced by countries in the Caribbean, even Belize, which is technically part of Central America geographically, but culturally and politically isolated because linguistically isolated, because our form of government is different than the neighboring republics. So the question of food security, the questions of low levels of rural employment, the questions of climate change and land degradation, many of the problems that we face are similar to the problems that you guys face there. And I'm really pleased with the solutions that were being presented by John. And so to me, John will be emblematic of best practice in Hawaii until I get over there and see other stuff. But until then, that's your position, John. Thank you for having me.
Right on. Well, I feel the same way, Chris. I want to see if I can plan a trip to Belize here pretty soon. I can be a farm volunteer for a week or two over at your place. How's that sound?
Yeah, it sounds good. We haven't had any visitors for over a year because of COVID.
Right.
So we could put you in a quarantine in a hot tent for 2 weeks. No, just kidding. We could work something out.
I'll have to keep in mind that you do have jaguar though, because I mean all the vegetation looks very familiar. So I'll be very comfortable walking around, except for the fact that there's jaguars hiding behind bananas and stuff. So
we also have 4 species of deadly poisonous snakes. So there's that too. Enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah, Hawaii's looking better and better today.
Yeah. And congratulations on getting rid of Trump. Good move. Well done. So
I want to just in closing here, folks, I want to point out, as you can see, a comment was made to me that our screen looks like NASCAR. Well, there's a lot of people that made this convention happen. First and foremost, Maui County, Mayor Victorino and the County Council of Maui, big supporters of us each year in our convention. Really appreciate how they show up. Mahi Pono, Ulu Pono has been very big supporters. Kamehameha Schools, they rock it. We have a Kuia project in Lahaina. Our Lahaina chapter president, Kaiko Kekona, is managing and developing that chapter over there. And Kamehameha Schools has been big to reforest the breadfruit forest there through Kaiko's efforts. And NRCS, Travis Thomason, who's a rock star in my eyes, the Pacific Region Director of NRCS. And Nellie's on the Beach, Joy and Don Nelson over in Kihei have been big supporters of HFUU along the way. Olson Trust from Big Island. Ed Olson's the largest private landowner in Hawaii of agriculture, have a 1,000-acre farm in Hilo, OK Farms. Ed's a beautiful guy. I love Ed. Really a big supporter of agriculture. Of course, the National Farmers Union. AgriDynamics is Jerry Brunetti's business. And his right-hand person, Regina Marinelli, is a good friend, and she continues to support us financially each year. And then all the other supporters, Down to Earth, Mana Foods is providing all our leadership food this weekend. And I can go on and on with the amount of people. Department of Agriculture, our chair, Phyllis Chimukuro Geyser, is really taking the department forward in ways of holding space for some of the things that we value here at HFUU. So there's a lot of great people involved in all this. And again, I want to give a shout out to Senator Daggle for being physically here with us today. And we're really looking forward to this convention, just continuing to build and grow in excitement and passion, because, hey, when you're working with the life of the land, you have to have a way to exude all that energy that comes to you. And I hope that HFUU can be representative of that. So just seeing what you guys brought today, it just speaks to all of that. So everybody come back after lunch. We're going to start our presentations. Katie, what time are we starting the videos today?
1 o'clock.
All right. Katie Zuber is our communications chair extraordinaire. And Christopher and John, bless your hearts, brothers. Thank you so much for being on today. We appreciate you.
All right. Remain awesome. Don't go changing.
All right.